My daughter stole $500 from me. And when I confronted her, it unraveled into a mess of high school drama, bullying, and a showdown with another kid's parents. It all started with a missing $500. I'd just gotten home from work, exhausted and eager to collapse onto the couch. I opened my purse to grab my wallet and pay the babysitter when I realized the money wasn't there. I knew I had withdrawn it that morning. Crisp bills, straight from the ATM. I even remembered putting it in the zippered compartment of my purse before heading out. At first, I told myself I must have misplaced it. Maybe I'd dropped it while rushing out of the grocery store. Or maybe I'd left it in the car. I spent the next hour tearing apart my house, searching drawers, the kitchen counter, under the couch cushions, everywhere. But deep down, I already knew it was gone. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. But something about the situation didn't sit right. The money wasn't just misplaced, it had vanished. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, a thought struck me. My daughter Lily. She was 16, headstrong and lately acting off. For weeks I'd noticed small changes. She'd been more withdrawn, secretive, and her phone was practically glued to her hand. Then there were the late-night study sessions at her friend's house, and the cryptic conversations I'd overheard on the phone. I shook my head. No, I was overthinking this. Lily wasn't perfect. She could be moody like any teenager. But she wasn't the kind of kid who'd steal from me. Right? Still, a nagging feeling kept me up that night. And the next morning, it only grew worse. That's when I noticed the new pair of sneakers sitting by the door. They were expensive. Far more than what Lily could afford with her part-time job. The tags were still attached. A matching hoodie was draped over the back of the chair in the hallway. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I waited for her to come home from school. When she walked through the door, I noticed the way she hesitated when she saw me sitting there, waiting for her. It was subtle, but enough to make my stomach churn. Lily, I began, trying to keep my voice calm. Can we talk? Her eyes darted to the hallway where the sneakers were still sitting. About what? She asked a little too casually. About the $500 that's missing from my purse. Her face turned a shade paler, but she quickly recovered. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice defensive. Lily. I stood up, crossing my arms. This isn't a game. I need you to tell me the truth. She rolled her eyes and muttered. I didn't take your money. But something in her tone betrayed her. And in that moment I knew. My own daughter had stolen from me. I stared at Lily, my chest tightening. I wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that I was overreacting. But the evidence was staring me in the face. Those sneakers, that hoodie, her defensiveness. Lily, I said softer this time. If you took the money, just tell me. I'm not angry. I just want to know the truth. Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms, mirroring my stance. I already told you, I didn't take it. I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. Then where did you get the money for those shoes? And that hoodie? She glanced toward the hallway, her face flushing a deep red. I've been saving up, she mumbled. You've been saving up? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Lily, you've had that part-time job for what, 3 months? You barely have enough to buy gas for your car, let alone a $200 pair of sneakers. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she looked down at the floor, scuffing her sock against the carpet. That was it, her tell. She'd done this as a kid, every time she broke something, or tried to lie about sneaking cookies before dinner. I leaned in closer. Lily, I need you to be honest with me. Right now. For a moment, I thought I saw guilt flash in her eyes. But then just as quickly it was gone, replaced by anger. Why are you always on my case? She snapped. You think I'm some kind of thief now? Her words stung, but I wasn't backing down. This isn't about being on your case. It's about $500 disappearing, and suddenly seeing you with expensive things you can't afford. She scoffed and turned away, muttering, whatever. My patience was hanging by a thread. Lily, don't walk away from me, I shouted. She froze mid-step, her back to me. Slowly she turned around, tears welling up in her eyes. Fine, she yelled, her voice breaking. I took it, okay? I took the stupid money. The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment I couldn't even speak. Why, Lily? I finally managed. Why would you do that? She hesitated, biting her lip, and that's when I saw it. The fear behind her defiance. You wouldn't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Try me, I said softer now. Whatever's going on, we can figure it out together. She stared at me for a long moment, like she was weighing her options. Finally, she slumped down onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I owed someone money, she mumbled. My stomach sank. What do you mean, you owed someone money? Who? She shook her head. It doesn't matter. Yes, it does, I pressed, sitting down beside her. Lily, if you're in trouble. I'm not in trouble, she snapped, jerking away from me. It's just someone helped me out, okay? And I needed to pay them back. What kind of help? I asked, my voice trembling. She looked at me, her eyes red and brimming with tears. I don't want to talk about it, but I wasn't letting this go. My daughter was hiding something, and I had a sinking feeling it was only the tip of the iceberg. I sat there, stunned, watching Lily wipe at her eyes. I could tell she was holding back, trying to keep whatever this was locked away. But I wasn't about to let it go. Lily, you can't just drop something like that and expect me to ignore it. If someone helped you out and you had to pay them back, I need to know why. She shook her head again, staring at the floor. I told you it's not a big deal. Not a big deal. You stole $500 from me. And now you're acting like this? Lily, please talk to me. Are you in danger? Did someone threaten you? Her head snapped up at that, her expression shifting to alarm. No. It's not like that. God, Mom, you always think the worst. Then explain it to me, I said, my voice rising. Because right now none of this is making sense. She groaned and pulled her knees up to her chest, burying her face against them. I could feel my frustration building, but I forced myself to stay calm. I reached out and gently touched her shoulder. Lily, I said softly, I'm your mom. I love you, but I can't help you if you don't tell me what's going on. She didn't move for a while, and I was starting to think she wasn't going to say anything. But then in a small voice she whispered, I borrowed money from someone. Who? I asked, my chest tightening. Her voice wavered. A guy at school. His name's Dylan. I frowned. Why would you borrow money from Dylan? What for? She hesitated again, and I could see the internal battle playing out on her face. Finally she muttered, for tickets. Tickets? To a concert, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Me and some friends wanted to go, and I didn't have enough. Dylan offered to cover it. I blinked, caught completely off guard. So, you stole $500 to pay back some guy for concert tickets? She nodded miserably, still not meeting my eyes. I sat back, my mind racing. A part of me was relieved. It wasn't drugs, it wasn't something dangerous. But another part of me was furious. She had stolen from me for something so frivolous. Why didn't you just ask me? I demanded. Why go to Dylan instead of coming to me? Because you would have said no, she shot back, her voice cracking. You never let me do anything fun. You're always on my case about saving money and being responsible. I didn't think you'd understand. Her words stung, but I pushed that aside. So you thought stealing from me was the better option? She flinched, guilt flashing across her face. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. Dylan kept asking for the money back, and I didn't know what else to do. He said if I didn't pay him, he'd tell everyone at school that I was a liar and a mooch. Wait, I said, holding up a hand. He threatened you. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I just wanted him to stop. I didn't want people to think I was a loser. My blood boiled. This wasn't just about some stupid concert. This Dylan kid had taken advantage of her, and she'd panicked. Lily, listen to me, I said firmly. You should never feel like you have to steal to solve a problem. And no one, has the right to bully you into something like this. She sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve. I know. I messed up. I'm sorry. I wanted to hug her, to tell her it was going to be okay. But I also knew this wasn't over. There were too many unanswered questions. How much did the tickets actually cost? I asked. She hesitated, then said, $200. I froze. Lily, where's the other $300? Her eyes widened, and I saw the panic return. I used it for something else. What else? Her lips trembled, and for a second, I thought she was going to clam up again. But then she whispered, I gave it to him. Gave it to Dylan? She nodded, looking miserable. He said I owed him extra for waiting so long. My jaw dropped. Are you telling me this kid charged you interest? She didn't say anything, but her silence was all the answer I needed. I felt the anger bubbling up inside me. This wasn't just some high school drama anymore. This Dylan kid was exploiting her, and I wasn't about to let it slide. Lily, I said, my voice deadly calm. I want you to give me his number. Now. Lily stared at me wide-eyed. No way, she blurted. If Dylan finds out I told you, he'll make my life even worse. Her panic was real, and I could see it written all over her face. But I wasn't backing down. Lily, this has already gone too far. You stole from me because of this kid. If he's taking advantage of you, I need to put a stop to it. She shook her head, clutching her phone protectively. You don't get it, Mom. You'll just make it worse. He's popular. Everyone listens to him. If he turns people against me. Her voice trailed off and I could see how trapped she felt. She wasn't just afraid of Dylan. She was afraid of the social fallout. I knelt in front of her, placing a hand on her knee. Lily, I know you're scared. But this isn't just about Dylan anymore. It's about you making things right. You're not alone in this, okay? I'm going to help you. Her eyes filled with tears and she finally nodded, though it was hesitant. Slowly, she unlocked her phone and handed it to me. Just don't make it worse, she whispered. I scrolled through her contacts until I found Dylan's number. I copied it down and handed the phone back to her. I'm not going to embarrass you, Lily, I promised. But I need to handle this. She didn't respond, just pulled her knees up to her chest and buried her face in them. I walked into the kitchen, my heart pounding as I stared at the number. What was I even going to say? I couldn't just call him and demand answers. It would only make things worse for Lily. No, I needed to be smart about this. I started by texting him, keeping it vague. Dylan. This is Lily's mom. I'd like to talk to you about something important. Can we meet in person? To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. What's this about? It's better if we talk face to face, I replied. Are you free tonight? There was a long pause before his next message came through. Fine. Meet me at the diner on Oak at 8. The casual tone of his response made my stomach churn. It was almost like he didn't care. Or worse, like he was confident he could talk his way out of whatever I had to say. I spent the next few hours trying to keep myself busy, but my mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about how this kid had manipulated my daughter, how he'd made her feel desperate enough to steal from her own family. By the time 8 o'clock rolled around, I was seething. The diner was nearly empty when I walked in. A bell jingled above the door, and a waitress behind the counter gave me a polite nod. I spotted Dylan immediately. He was sitting in a corner booth, scrolling on his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. He looked younger than I expected, with shaggy brown hair and a smug grin that made my blood boil. Dylan, I said, walking up to the booth. He glanced up, his expression shifting to one of mild curiosity. You're Lily's mom? That's right, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. Thanks for meeting me. He leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. So what's this about? Did Lily screw something up? His casual tone made me clench my fists under the table. Actually, this is about the money she gave you, I said, keeping my voice steady. I want to know why you pressured her into paying you extra. Dylan raised an eyebrow, then smirked. Oh, that. She owed me. I was just getting what I was due. She borrowed $200 for concert tickets. I snapped. You took $500. That's not getting what you're due. That's extortion. He shrugged. Hey, interest is part of the deal. Maybe she should have read the fine print. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This kid had no remorse. He actually thought he was justified. Listen to me, I said, leaning forward. Lily made a mistake, but you took advantage of her. You manipulated her into thinking she didn't have a choice. That ends now. He snorted. And what are you gonna do about it? Call the cops? Go ahead. I didn't do anything illegal. His arrogance was staggering, but I wasn't about to let him win. I don't need to call the cops, I said, my voice ice cold. You see, I've already spoken to Lily about this. She told me everything. And if I hear about you bullying her or anyone else again, I won't just go to the cops. I'll go to your parents, your school, and anyone else who'll listen. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are." His smirk faltered just for a second. "You think anyone's gonna believe you?" he asked, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice now. "I have proof," I lied smoothly. "And trust me, I'm not afraid to use it." For the first time he looked uncomfortable. He glanced around the diner, then back at me. "Fine," he muttered. "Whatever. I won't bother her anymore." "That's not good enough," I said, my voice firm. "You're going to give her back the extra $300 you took from her." His eyes widened. "What? No way. Do you really want to test me on this, Dylan?" I interrupted, my gaze unwavering. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Finally he muttered, "Fine. I'll get her the money." "Good," I said, standing up. "And remember, if I hear about this happening again, you'll regret it." I walked out of the diner, my heart pounding. I'd won this battle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the war. When I got home that night, Lily was waiting for me in the living room, curled up on the couch with her phone in her hands. She jumped up the moment she heard the door open, her face pale with worry. "Well?" she asked, her voice shaky. "What happened? What did you say to him?" I closed the door behind me, hanging my coat on the rack with slow, deliberate movements. I needed to gather my thoughts before I spoke. Finally, I turned to her. "It's handled," I said. She frowned, clearly not satisfied with my vague answer. "What does that mean? What did he say?" I sighed and sat down on the couch, motioning for her to join me. "I confronted him, Lily. I told him I know what he did, and I made it clear that he's not to bother you, or anyone else again." Her eyes widened. "You really said that?" "Of course I did," I replied. "No one has the right to take advantage of you like that." For a moment she just stared at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and relief. But then her shoulders slumped. "He's going to be so mad," she muttered. "You don't know what he's like, Mom. He could turn everyone against me." "Lily, listen to me," I said firmly. "I don't care how popular he is or how many people he knows. If he tries anything, we'll deal with it. Together." She nodded slowly, though I could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. "And there's more," I added. "I told him he has to pay back the extra $300 he took from you." He agreed. Her head snapped up. He did." "Yes," I said. "But I want you to promise me something, Lily. If anything like this ever happens again, you come to me first. No secrets. No borrowing money from kids like Dylan. Understand?" Her face crumpled and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't know what else to do." I pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly as she cried. "It's okay," I said softly. "We'll get through this. But you have to trust me, Lily. I'll always have your back, no matter what." She nodded against my shoulder, her sobs gradually quieting. The next day, I made sure to keep a close eye on Lily. She seemed better, less tense, but I could tell she was still on edge. At breakfast, she barely touched her food, and every time her phone buzzed, she flinched like it might explode. "Did Dylan text you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She shook her head, staring down at her plate. "No. But everyone at school's going to know something happened. He's not the type to stay quiet." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "If he says anything, you let me know." "Okay." She nodded, but her expression was doubtful. That afternoon, while Lily was at school, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Frowning, I answered. "Hello. Is this Lily's mom?" a gruff male voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Dylan's dad," the man said, his tone sharp. "We need to talk." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. "About what?" "About you threatening my son," he snapped. I felt my blood pressure spike. "I didn't threaten him," I said firmly. "I told him to stop taking advantage of my daughter, and I told him to pay back the money he extorted from her." "Extorted?" he repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. "My son said she borrowed money from him, and he just wanted it back. That doesn't sound like extortion to me. He didn't just ask for the money back. I shot back. He took an extra $300 and pressured her into giving it to him. That's not how borrowing works. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Dylan's dad finally spoke again, his tone was defensive. Look, kids make mistakes. But that doesn't give you the right to bully my son. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. I didn't bully him. I held him accountable. And if he thinks he can intimidate my daughter again, he's sorely mistaken. Is that another threat? He asked, his voice rising. It's a promise, I said coldly. Now, unless you want me to take this to the school, or the police, I suggest you focus on teaching your son how to treat people with respect. There was another long silence, and then the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling with adrenaline. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The silence in the house after that phone call felt deafening. I kept replaying the conversation with Dylan's dad in my head, trying to figure out if I'd handled it the right way. On one hand, I wasn't about to let him make me feel guilty for standing up for my daughter. On the other, I couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was spiraling into something bigger than I'd anticipated. When Lily came home from school that afternoon, she was visibly tense. Her usual quick hi was replaced with a mumble as she tossed her backpack by the door and trudged to the kitchen. I followed her, watching as she poured herself a glass of water and stared out the window like she was trying to avoid looking at me. How was school? I asked, keeping my voice as casual as possible. She shrugged. Fine, I guess. I wasn't buying it. Lily, did anything happen? She hesitated, gripping the glass tightly before finally setting it down. Dylan's mad, she said quietly. He's been telling people that you freaked out on him for no reason, and that I'm some kind of spoiled brat who couldn't pay him back. I felt my jaw tighten. And people are believing him? I don't know, she said, her voice cracking. Maybe. Some of my friends are acting weird. I think they're trying to stay out of it, but it's like, they don't know who to believe. My heart ached for her. High school could be brutal enough without adding this kind of drama to the mix. Lily, I said gently, you did the right thing by telling me the truth. Whatever Dylan is saying, it doesn't change the fact that he was in the wrong. She nodded, but I could tell my words weren't enough to ease her anxiety. I just want this to go away, she whispered. I don't want everyone at school hating me. They won't, I assured her. And if they do, then they're not real friends. She didn't respond, just stared at the floor with a defeated expression. The next morning, I got an unexpected call from Lily's school. The principal, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Delgado, asked if I could come in for a meeting. When I arrived, I was surprised to see both Dylan and his father already in the office, sitting across from Ms. Delgado's desk. Dylan looked smug, leaning back in his chair like he didn't have a care in the world. His father, on the other hand, looked ready to explode. Mrs. Harris, Ms. Delgado said as I walked in. Thank you for coming. Please have a seat. I sat down, my heart pounding. What's this about? Ms. Delgado folded her hands on her desk. It seems there's been some tension between your daughter and Dylan. His father has raised some concerns. Concerns? I repeated, glancing at Dylan's dad. She threatened my son, he said, his voice brimming with outrage. Told him he had to pay her $300 or else. Now he's being ostracized at school because of lies she's spreading. I blinked, stunned by the audacity of the accusation. That's not what happened, I said firmly. Dylan took advantage of my daughter. He pressured her into giving him more money than she owed, and he's been bullying her ever since. That's ridiculous. Dylan's dad snapped. My son doesn't need to extort anyone. If anything, your daughter is the one causing trouble. I turned to Ms. Delgado. Lily made a mistake by borrowing money, but Dylan demanded more than she owed and used intimidation to get it. I have no doubt he's spinning the story to make himself look like the victim. Ms. Delgado's sharp gaze shifted to Dylan. Is that true? He shrugged, a smirk tugging at his lips. I don't know what she's talking about. Lily borrowed money and I just asked for it back. That's not all you did, I shot back. You told her she owed you extra for making you wait. That's extortion, plain and simple. Ms. Delgado's expression darkened. Dylan, is there any truth to this? He shifted uncomfortably. But his father cut in before he could answer. "This is absurd," he said. "My son isn't a criminal, and I won't have him treated like one." "This isn't a courtroom, Mr. Graham," Ms. Delgado said coolly. "If there's been inappropriate behavior, we need to address it." I could see Dylan squirming now, his confidence starting to falter. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it," he muttered. "I just wanted my money back." Ms. Delgado raised an eyebrow. "And the extra $300? He avoided her gaze, mumbling something I couldn't hear. "That's what I thought," she said, her tone stern. "Dylan, you'll return the money to Lily immediately. And if I hear about any further incidents, there will be consequences." Dylan's father started to protest, but Ms. Delgado silenced him with a glare. "This discussion is over," she said. I left the office feeling a mix of relief and lingering anger. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but at least Lily would get her money back, and Dylan had been put in his place. Back at home, I told Lily what had happened. She looked stunned but relieved. "So it's really over?" she asked. "For now," I said, pulling her into a hug. "But if he tries anything again, you come straight to me. Deal?" She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thanks, Mom." As much as I wanted to believe this was the end, I couldn't shake the feeling that Dylan, or his father, might not let things go so easily. The first few days after the meeting with Ms. Delgado were quiet, almost too quiet. Lily seemed lighter, like the weight of the situation had finally been lifted off her shoulders. She even smiled at dinner and laughed when I joked about how burnt my lasagna was, a rare sight after weeks of tension. Dylan paid her back the $300 the next day, handing her the cash at school without a word. She told me about it that evening, and while I could see her relief, I also noticed how carefully she avoided meeting my eyes. Something was still bothering her, and I wasn't sure what. Then 3 days later, everything came crashing down. It was a Saturday morning, and I was halfway through folding laundry when Lily came running into the living room, her phone clutched in her hand. "Mom!" she gasped, her face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, dropping the towel I was folding. She thrust her phone at me, and my stomach dropped when I saw the screen. It was a group chat, filled with screenshots of private messages. Lily's private messages. In them, she was begging Dylan for more time to pay him back, apologizing over and over again. There were also messages where he was mocking her, calling her pathetic and weak. Where did these come from? I asked, my voice shaking. "Someone leaked them," she said, her voice trembling. "They're all over school. Everyone's sharing them." My chest tightened as I scrolled through the messages. The captions people were adding were brutal, taunting Lily for being desperate, accusing her of playing the victim, calling her every name in the book. "I knew this wasn't over," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I sat down, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just bullying. This was a coordinated attack. Dylan must have leaked the messages as some sort of revenge, and now the whole school was piling on. "Lily," I said gently, "listen to me. This is not your fault. Dylan is trying to humiliate you, but I'm not going to let him get away with it." She looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "How? He's already won. Everyone hates me now." I grabbed her hand and squeezed it tightly. "No, he hasn't won. And I'm going to prove it." I spent the next few hours calling and emailing the school. Ms. Delgado assured me that they were investigating the situation, and that they took cyberbullying very seriously. But her words felt hollow. This wasn't just about Dylan anymore, it was about the culture he'd created, the way he'd rallied other students against my daughter. By the time Monday rolled around, I was at my breaking point. I decided to do something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I called Dylan's mom. Unlike her husband, Dylan's mom, Julia, sounded exhausted. I could hear it in her voice as soon as she picked up. "Yes, this is Julia," she said wearily. "What can I do for you?" "This is Lily's mom," I said, my tone measured. "We need to talk about your son." There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "What's he done now?" Her reaction caught me off guard. You know he's been causing problems?" "I have a pretty good idea," she admitted. "He's been in trouble before." "What is it this time?" I explained everything, the money, the leaked messages, the way he'd turned the school against Lily. As I spoke, Julia's sighs grew heavier. "I'm so sorry," she said when I finished. "I don't know where we went wrong with him. His dad always defends him and Her voice cracked. I've tried to rein him in, but it's like he doesn't care about anyone but himself. Her honesty caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I don't want to ruin his life, I said finally. But I can't let him keep doing this. It's not just Lily, he's making everyone around him miserable. I understand, Julia said. Let me handle it. I'll make sure he apologizes. I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't sure an apology was enough to undo the damage he'd caused. That evening Dylan showed up at our front door. He was alone, looking sheepish for the first time since this whole mess began. Lily refused to come downstairs, so I met him in the doorway, crossing my arms as I waited for him to speak. My mom said I had to apologize, he muttered, barely meeting my eyes. Do you mean it? I asked. He hesitated, then shrugged. I don't know. I guess. That's not good enough, I said firmly. Do you have any idea what you've done to Lily? How much you've hurt her? He didn't respond, just stared at the ground. Let me make this clear, I continued. If you ever go near her again, if you so much as say her name, I will not hesitate to press charges. Do you understand me? He nodded, his face pale. Yeah, I get it. Good, I said, slamming the door in his face. Later that night I found Lily sitting on her bed, scrolling through her phone with a blank expression. I sat down beside her and pulled her into a hug. He won't bother you anymore, I said. She leaned into me, her body trembling. I just want everything to go back to normal. It will, I promised. But we're not going to let him win. You're stronger than this, Lily. Don't ever forget that. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. The weeks that followed were a slow process of picking up the pieces. Dylan stayed true to his word, or maybe he just feared his mom or the consequences, but he kept his distance from Lily. The bullying at school began to die down as the novelty of the leaked messages wore off. Still, the damage lingered. Lily spent most of her time at home, withdrawn and cautious. She wasn't the bright, bubbly girl she used to be. It broke my heart to see her so unsure of herself, walking around like she was trying not to take up too much space in the world. I knew I couldn't fix everything for her, but I could help her find her way back to herself. One night after dinner, I sat her down at the kitchen table. Lily, I began. I know this has been one of the hardest things you've ever gone through, and I know it might not feel like it now, but you're going to come out of this stronger. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. I don't feel strong, she said quietly. You are, I insisted. And I'm going to help you see that. But I need you to trust me, okay? Let me help. She nodded slowly, and over the next few weeks, we took small steps to rebuild her confidence. I encouraged her to focus on the things she loved: painting, reading, spending time with her close friends. I even helped her set up a small art corner in her room, complete with new supplies and a canvas to paint on whenever she needed an outlet. But the biggest turning point came when she decided to speak up. One evening, she came into the living room holding her laptop. Mom, she said hesitantly, I've been thinking about writing a post for the school's website. About what happened. About how people should be careful who they trust, and how bullying makes you feel. I set down my coffee and looked at her, surprised. Are you sure? She nodded, her expression serious. I think it might help. Not just me, but maybe someone else who's going through the same thing. My chest swelled with pride. That's a brave thing to do, Lily. I don't feel brave, she admitted. But I'm tired of being scared. And I'm tired of people like Dylan getting away with stuff like this. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. You're incredible, you know that? She smiled, a real genuine smile, and I could see a spark of her old self shining through. The post went live a week later. It was raw, honest, and powerful. Lily didn't name names, but she shared her story in a way that resonated with so many people. Messages of support poured in, not just from her classmates, but from parents, teachers, and even people she didn't know. The next day at school, she told me things were different. People approached her in the hallways not to mock her, but to tell her how brave she was. Even some of the kids who'd initially sided with Dylan apologized, saying they hadn't realized how much pain they'd caused. For the first time in months, Lily came home smiling. As for Dylan, his reputation took a hit after the post. While Lily didn't call him out directly, enough people put two and two together. His friends began to distance themselves, and he no longer walked the halls with the same smug confidence. His mom even reached out to me again, apologizing profusely and promising to get him into therapy. I didn't care about his fall from grace. What mattered to me was that Lily was finally starting to heal. One night as I was tucking her in, something I hadn't done since she was a little girl, she looked up at me and said, "Mom, thank you." "For what?" I asked, brushing her hair out of her face. "For standing up for me. For not giving up on me." I smiled, my heart swelling. "That's my job, Lily. I'll always stand up for you. No matter what." She reached out and hugged me, and in that moment, I knew we'd come through the other side of this stronger than ever.